Hello and welcome to Default Assault, where we take on everything by default. I am your host, Demosthenes, and with me, as always, is our awesome co-host, Mr. Kyle Nash. How's it going, Kyle?
I am ready to get crazy with this. We kept telling people we're nerdy pop culture, not just movies. We get to live it tonight. I'm stoked.
Of course, and we have a special guest, Mr. Joshua Lowenberger. When it comes to video game music, I cannot think of a more perfect person to invite on our show. You play for a band called Glitch, which is very popular in Western New York, and you specialize in video game covers specifically. What exactly got you and Glitch interested in that concept to begin with?
Probably just my love for music and my love for video games and the combination of the two. A friend of mine approached me one day. He's the keyboard player in the band. His name is Tony Farrow. And he came to me and he was like, "Josh, would you like to start a video game band?" And there's only one answer to that. So now we have a video game band.
Today we'll be talking about classic Sega music versus classic Nintendo music. Which one is better? But before we dive into that, I just wanted to open the floor to both of you, and maybe we can talk about some of our favorite tracks from both Nintendo and Sega, and which ones inspired us when we were young to get to a point where we can one day talk about it on a low-rated YouTube show.
So the first time that I consciously remember noticing the music in a video game and thinking about it as more than just background music or video game music probably is Final Fantasy VI, which is Super Nintendo. It's actually Final Fantasy VI, but in the States it was released as 3. There are several tracks in that game that are always in the back of my head somewhere. They only had 3 Final Fantasy games at the time, so I went back and paid attention to the other 2 that we had, because this is basically pre-internet. It's not like I could just go onto a computer and look stuff up and listen to other composers' music at that point, or at least for video games. But I would say that's the game that really made me double check, double think, I guess. Stop and think about the music that was in these video games.
Listen, man, first of all, let me call out the Final Fantasy 3/6 thing. It's an excellent choice. Hell, they even simulate an opera in the damn thing.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, it's certainly a way you can get to that. I remember the Veld, the music from the Veld on a regular basis getting in my head. That is, as the kids say, well, I have to say it like this because, you're talking about back in your day, Final Fantasy 3. As the kids would say, that's a sick beat. See, but when mommies and daddies were playing on their regular Nintendos and weren't mommies and daddies yet, this is where I go, and I go all the way back to Castlevania, particularly being the effect that it had on me. To your point there, Josh, you don't have the internet, but what Castlevania had prominently displayed about it is that it was, in fact, a Konami game. Anything by Konami had an amazing track. Blades of Steel, that soundtrack still holds up with stuff you hear today. And of course, nowadays you got the Mans and everything that just rely on pop music rather than, having to create an 8-bit MIDI. Konami games in general always whoop that ass. Listen, I know people can hum the Mario theme left, right, upward, and center, but at the end of the day, if it's got Konami on it, it probably beats the shit out of the Mario theme, in my view.
Well, for me, I wasn't as big into video games when I was young as much as you two. My extent actually pretty much finished after Sega Nintendo, after the console wars. That's where my gaming expertise ends. But when I was a kid, I owned a Sega. I still own that Sega. That motherfucker still works. And it works well, and I still have an arsenal of games for that. My best friend at the time had a Nintendo, so we would just go to each other's houses to experience the different games. Now, the first time I noticed the music of video games, and the artistic appeal behind some of these awesome tracks was on Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog. When people talk about the music of Sonic the Hedgehog, they tend to always point out one track in particular, and it's the same track that caught my eye when I was playing the game. It was Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic 2. Because a blue hedgehog can only come from a freaking chemical plant, so there's synergy there. But my question more so is, beyond nostalgia, what do you guys think are legitimately some of the best scores from these consoles? Maybe we can start with Nintendo. And when people think of Nintendo, yes, everybody tends to think the first one that comes to mind, as Kyle said, is Mario. Score so great, they decide to not use more than 30 seconds in the movie. I wonder why it sucked.
True. So I think greatness and ubiquitousness are two different things, especially for the discussion that we're about to have. I love the Mega Man soundtrack. I definitely love the Castlevania soundtrack. One series that stands out to me that I didn't play so much, but actually through Glitch I've gotten to experience a lot more of, is Donkey Kong Country. If you listen to some of those tracks, deep's not the right word, but they're very interesting. And I think Donkey Kong Country has some of the, if not catchiest, some of the most well-written tracks. And they're longer than like 30-second blurbs.
Do they sound better when you're drinking a banana daiquiri?
I would assume so.
Would a man that epic drink a banana? Do you see that beard? He's not drinking a banana daiquiri. What's wrong?
Perhaps a banana bread beer.
Boom.
Oh.
See, step your game up, Demos. Know your audience.
I don't even like banana daiquiris, but personally, I would have gone with margarita. We're talking about a monkey that basically collects bananas throughout the entire game. Give me a break.
Trying to tell me that DK wouldn't throw back a banana beer brew? Yeah, out your damn mind.
You know why there weren't any banana daiquiris in that game? Because that would have been his invincibility for the rest of the game. He would have had one, and boom, game over. You're in God mode.
It's true. He would have gone. He might have even gone on a rampage.
Perhaps. I would argue that if you had the banana bread beer, there would have been no battle. King K. Rool and Donkey Kong could have reached a peaceful settlement.
And your game would have spontaneously combusted.
That's right. We talked about Castlevania, but the particular thing I call out is game-wise, the chapter in the series that got the most filleted was Simon's Quest. All the way around there, that is some of the strongest damn music. You gotta recognize it. And the band that I listened to back, this is late 90s, you know, I got it from a CD from a buddy of mine. Hey, listen to this. Dude, first of all, dude challenged me to pick out every single song on there. Yeah, by the way, for the record, did it.
Nice.
This guy had this band, I should say, called the Mini Bosses. Not sure if you know of them, Josh, or not, but
I do.
See, his stock keeps going up, Demos. Meanwhile, you're talking about banana daiquiri.
Well, I set my guests up for success. You know, in this particular case, I have to be the default of default assault.
Man, wow! If you set your guests up for success, you need to be thinking about a gig replacing Ed McMahon, bro. Anyway,
I'll take it. What's the offer?
But yeah, that particular chapter is great. But if we're talking about games that don't get as much attention overall, that you want to pull out that shocker moment, there's one game that's pretty obscure, but I really enjoyed the soundtrack to. It's called Magic Sword. Just the opening level alone has a driving beat and something that moves. Like, I would just think about this song in my head when I was running late for class, and would damn sure make it every time. But, going over to the Sega side, too, another game that you probably don't hear as much about other than its name and its very unfair hardness after you beat Apollo Creed would be the Rocky game on Sega. The music was fantastic, and fighting Drago was ridiculously unfair because, older games. But hey, also for obscurity and hard games, from either console, Ghosts and Goblins, gentlemen. Ghosts and Goblins, and especially the way it was remixed on the Super Nintendo just made it shine brighter.
Well, since we've gone into, we touched upon Sega a little bit there, I cannot leave Nintendo without calling out the music from Blaster Master, because this is one of the few.
Oh, hell
yeah.
That was gonna be the obscure one that I was gonna mention.
Well, Josh, what are some of your favorite from Sega?
I mean, obviously, Sonic. I love Sonic, and I love Streets of Rage. Echo the Dolphin had some really good stuff.
It's a great call by you.
You want to talk about games that are impossible to beat? There's one for you.
How do you feel when a dolphin is kicking your ass? I mean,
generally it wasn't the dolphin that was kicking my ass. It was the sharks and the starfish and the spiked rocks, and also the lack of oxygen.
The real pain with that is like you'd watch the demo and it would look like literally like art as Echo flowed from place to place. Then I'd watch someone try to play this thing and I would have Flipper deader faster than anything. I couldn't call him Echo at that point. He was just Flipper.
Yeah, I think everybody, when I was a kid, everybody always thought it was the Flipper game.
Okay. So a game that I absolutely love, that the sound in it is awful, Altered Beast.
Oh,
And that's another Genesis game, and that's just to give you an idea of how the spectrum goes for the Sega.
well, and that's what I mean by missed opportunity. I mean, Josh, are you kidding me? There are dudes turning into various forms of, albeit altered, beasts. And then some of the bosses, you're fighting devils and centaurs and stuff, and that's the best you could come up with? Somebody mailed it in. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, definitely.
Well, to echo some of these thoughts, I agree. I mean, when it comes to the Sega system, nothing quite, in my opinion, beats the Sonic games, especially the first two. Now, when it comes to the actual discussion at hand of Sega versus Nintendo music, I don't necessarily have a strong opinion one way or the other. I do agree that Sega missed some opportunity, but when it hit well. The Marble Zone from the first game is one of my favorites, and it's not just because I'm Greek, or the Aquatic Ruin Zone.
So when I think about comparing the two systems sonically, no pun intended, I always try to think of games that came out for both systems that were similar, or even like the same game that was tweaked a little bit to run on each system. And the first one that always pops in my head is Earthworm Jim. This is where I'm biased, but I think the Sega had better music.
The technology of the Sega system was far superior on that front. It was better designed to play music, which is why, oftentimes I scream from the hilltops about the success of Nintendo. They had less to work with and had a lot more memorable themes come out of it.
We got 32-bit processing, man.
Honestly, I think that ultimately that what it comes down to is the composer.
Correct.
that wrote the music behind those things. Because today I would tell you that Donkey Kong Country was some of the best classic music, and that was Super Nintendo and not Genesis. And I grew up I grew up kind of on both, but more on the Genesis. And there are many things, Streets of Rage included, which have awesome compositions.
I'll see your Streets of Rage and raise you a final fight. You could come out with certain other things other than Miracle Warriors and Phantasy Star. I could usually come out with a Nintendo version that would compete. And actually, I could even argue with Phantasy Star and be like, well, Final Fantasy can match that. I wouldn't go there just because I don't think they're exactly the same to really be compared like that. I think they should both get to stand out on their own. But, to Josh's point, I think it comes down more to the execution. And more often than not, at least from what I observed, the Genesis had more to work with, but there was a lot more missed opportunity in my opinion.
I think that's also true, is that the Genesis had a lot more misses than hits when it came to music. But the hits that it had, I think it had an average better than the Super Nintendo.
My biggest takeaway when you look at the music from both systems is there is kind of a distinction that Sega tends to sound much more of a rock band with a techno beat compared to Nintendo's more classic symphony with an emphasis on melody. Both systems, they have a specific kind of turn that they take with their approach to music, and I think that's very, very evident, especially with Mario versus Sonic, or pretty much any Sega fighting game sounds like you've entered a techno club. They wanted to sound edgier, they wanted to sound cooler. Sega did what Nintendo don't. However, with Nintendo's overall emphasis on melody, well, it's no wonder that people tend to remember and have the Nintendo music stuck in their heads throughout a generation.
I actually agree a lot with what Demo said. But I also think that a lot on both sides of the coin, a driving difference behind the music on each console was sort of the direction that the company taking it was, or the company behind it was taking it. And Nintendo has always had a more family-friendly focus on their games. So while Mortal Kombat was on both systems, for example, generally the sort of games that were less mainstream that made it to each console, I think for Nintendo was a little friendlier, I'm going to put that in air quotes, and Sega Genesis was a little more, whatever the opposite of that is, dirtier, I guess. Because of that, I think there are probably more fighters on the Sega Genesis. And honestly, when you're playing a beat 'em up, the kind of music you want to get pumped, so you want that sort of like dance music sort of feel, that techno feel, that just, it's like a steady pulse, it's got you going. And I think that sort of leads to some of the decisions behind why the music is the way it is for each of those systems.
So, Josh, what you're telling me is when you listen to the songs from the Mushroom Kingdom, you don't want to beat someone up, you know?
Not generally.
Not a person, Demos, but more reptiles and amphibians, really.
Yes.
Would raw fit as an adjective for you there for the Sega side there?
Sure, I'll buy that.
We'll say this, Josh. Let's say you're going to die tomorrow by Snoo Snoo. How do you want to be remembered for thinking of Sega versus Nintendo?
So if you'd asked me this question, seriously, if you'd asked me this question 20 years ago, minus the Snoo Snoo part, I would have been Sega Genesis all the way, no questions asked. I want to say more enlightened version of myself, the older, wiser version of myself. It's not so clear cut. I think I've said it already, but I think when Sega hits, they hit out of the park, and they don't do average very well. And that stands out in my mind, especially I feel like I played a lot more Genesis games than I ever did Super Nintendo games. And really, that's the console war that I remember. I know they did others, but for me, that's the console war.
I have a very scientific, foolproof method to end this debate once and for all. I don't know if the internet is prepared for what I'm about to lay on it, but here it is. Sega had the better Aladdin game. He had a sword. Sega wins. Yeah. Tell me I'm wrong.
Demos, you're wrong.
Got him.
Based on what? Back that up. Try.
No, you told me to tell you were wrong, so I did.
Damn it, someone took me literally for once. Well, thank you, Josh, for joining us for the show. I'm looking forward to Glitch's next album, entitled Bug Bites, which is coming out soon. Can you tell us some, give us a sneak preview of some of your favorite tracks from the new album?
We do a version of Sticker Brush Symphony, which is a Donkey Kong Country game music, and it is the smoothest. It's like smooth jazz, but that doesn't really do it justice. It is fantastic. It's one of my favorites, and I actually get to play some keys on that song too, which maybe biases me towards liking it a little more. Another one that I really enjoy that's coming out on the new album is we cover the Mortal Kombat theme, which is really, I think, the theme from the movie, but it's close enough.
That's the best thing about the movie.
It was the best thing about the movie. And actually, for both of those songs, we have special guests, some friends of ours that came in and did, I'm going to say, literal magic on the album. So we have a sax player featured in Sticker Brush, and I've literally had somebody, I was listening to it in the car, and I had a friend in the car, and she was like, "Man, I really like this jazz that you're listening to," and I just started laughing because I was like, it's not jazz, it's me. So you can look us up on Facebook. We are Glitch Video Game Band, and then the link to SoundCloud to listen to those tracks. We also have our first album there in its entirety, called Mario Time. It's 9 tunes from the Mario Bros. Across various games.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to checking that out. You should all check it out. Links will be down below. Well, that'll be it for today's episode of Default Assault. What do you guys think? Do you think that Sega music is the best? Do you think Nintendo music is the best? Or do you think that we're all just crazy? Well, let us know in the comments, but make sure to subscribe and like before you call us crazy. Make sure to find Josh in all those wonderful places on Facebook. His music is fantastic. I highly recommend it. And Kyle, where can we find you?
Of course, you can find me on Twitter as the student of the game at the SOTG. And of course, I'm also on Facebook as the student of the game. And of course, check out most recently, by the time this episode goes up, you'll probably be close to seeing the introduction of my series that'll come up on Hilarity by Default and in GSC Sports. Hilarity by Default's Comic Nerd's Guide to Sports.
And also find me on Twitter at Default Hilarity, and on Facebook, because I'm also on Facebook, Hilarity by Default. And this is us reminding you that life is truly hilarious by default.